Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan, here today to talk to you about a very big story in the world of Microsoft, Xbox, and their premier flagship video game series, Halo. Or more specifically, how Halo is created, as Bonnie Ross, the head of 343 Industries, the company behind Halo, has announced her retirement. Now, before we get into the specifics of both Bonnie Ross's letter, what it means, what actions Microsoft is taking, and why some folks are maybe not responding to it in the best of ways, I do want to remind folks that this channel, Hoeg Law Virtual Legality, is in fact supported by viewers and listeners like you. Please do check out our Utreon and our Patreon for ways to sponsor things on this channel, including, as LadyEmily has done here, and special thanks to LadyEmily for doing it, sponsoring an episode like this one. Please do go check those out if you're interested. Now let's talk about what was said. As I mentioned, Bonnie Ross is the head of 343 Industries, or she was until today, where she put out a tweet just an hour or so ago that says the following: "While I had hoped to stay with Halo until we release the winter update, I am letting you know I will be leaving 343 and attending to a family medical issue. I'm incredibly proud of the work everyone at 343 Industries has done with Halo Infinite, the Master Chief Collection, the Halo television series, and so much more. It has been an honor to serve alongside the team for the last 15 years and to be a part of a universe that I love. Thank you to everyone in the Halo community for your support. Halo's future is bright. I cannot wait for all of you to experience what we have in store and to cheer alongside you as a fan at the Halo World Championship in October. Axios, Bonnie Ross." And with that ends the only head of 343 Industries that 343 Industries has ever known. And in terms of responding to it, as you can imagine, the internet has been fraught. Halo is a series of a lot of importance to a lot of people, and while I once enjoyed the series, probably with the same level of passion as many of you, I'm no longer one of those people, so you have to take my stance on these things with a grain of salt, and part of that is because I really haven't enjoyed 343 Industries' stewardship so much. So with that as my biases, my tilt in terms of analyzing the stories, I do think it's important to note that one wrong way to comment on all of this is to make fun or otherwise celebrate what is described in this letter as leaving early for a family medical issue. In fact, this story was brought to my attention by a Twitter user that I didn't highlight here because it's not important, just because I disagree with this basic premise. It's not important to highlight those particular issues, that said, hey, is this what you meant when they might need to make an example out of 343 Industries? Because it was only 11 days ago that I tweeted in response to 343 putting out their once again delayed roadmap for Halo Infinite that this was becoming an optical problem, if nothing else. And this was in response to a tweet from SkillUp, who's a YouTube reviewer of video games, who said 343 have delayed the start of the next season until March 2023 and completely canceled Couch Co-op after repeatedly promising it as a cornerstone franchise feature. I really hope MS brings big changes to the way Halo is managed. This isn't working. And this is not a SkillUp only kind of understanding of what's happening with Halo. And one of the things that I said, again, from the outside looking in a bit, because I haven't enjoyed Halo 4, I haven't enjoyed Halo 5, I didn't enjoy Halo Infinite to the same extent that a number of other people did, and if you love it, that's fantastic. But when you lose the faith of the audience that you already have, you've got a corporate messaging problem, which is one of the things that we talk about in this space. So I said, honestly, I think at some point you probably have to make an example of 343 if you're Microsoft for optics, if nothing else, not actually ascribing blame. None of us can sit here on the outside and say, Bonnie Ross did this, Bonnie Ross did that, X person did this. These are the reasons that Halo Infinite died, was because of these decisions in those boardrooms. We don't know that. We can't speak to that. But what we can speak to is the final product. And there are issues with how Halo Infinite has been treated, both from its initial kind of creation when we had that reaction and it got delayed for a full year, missed the launch that was on every Series X box, then got released in what I would call a partial state. I know that many would disagree with me and really enjoy the campaign, more power to you, but that has had problems since then. I said this kind of sentiment, the kind of sentiment that was ascribed to SkillUp, is poisonous for your industry ambitions. Microsoft wants to own all of these developers, wants you to believe in them, wants you to trust them as stewards of these properties. And Halo's their crown jewel. Halo is still synonymous with Xbox as a brand. They share the same green. You still see Master Chief. Whenever you think about or describe Xbox, you see it at the top of shows in all corners of the world. And I said, I sincerely hope they right the ship, but as they say, hope is not a strategy. Consumers should hope that 343 gets the job done, but I don't have a lot of faith in the way that they were managed. That's the truth. But when we look at messages like this, I don't think it's fair to say this is Microsoft making an example of the situation. I'll talk about why. We're going to go through some of the articles that mention a few things here, but one of the things that jumps out at me at the top of this particular message is, while I had hoped to stay with Halo until we released the winter update, sounds to me like someone that had already decided to retire. Now, did they decide to retire because of a family issue? Did they decide to retire for a different reason? I couldn't say. But this opening sentence, in terms of corporate messaging land, sounds very much to me like someone who had already decided to retire and, more importantly, had already talked that through with the hires up in Microsoft proper. And there's reason to believe that that is in fact the case as we look at some of these articles, which we will do in just a moment. The other thing I would add is that, and this might be my age, this might just be where I look at the industry from, and health issues and family issues and other things that I have dealt with in my career, I never, even if it looks like corporate messaging, even if it looks like excuse making, I never question family health issues. I don't. Family medical issue is the kind of thing that says, okay, maybe you disbelieve them, but you're speculating entirely. We shouldn't mess around with this. There are things above video games. There are things above pop culture. There are things above legal firms and careers on YouTube or anything in between. And that is your health, the health of your family. All of these things really are an area of sensitivity for a lot of people, including myself. And I would caution anybody that's looking at this and saying they are lying, or this was done to get Bonnie Ross out of there, or asking me if this was Microsoft making an example out of her. I think that's treating the question unfairly. So we're not going to do that in this space. If you thought we were, I'm very sorry. But we are going to look at what messaging actually went out from Microsoft, who wound up effectively leaking things to a very Microsoft favorable site in Windows Central. It's in the name. And Jez Corden, who we've talked about on Twitter a little bit. Halo lead Bonnie Ross is leaving 343 Industries and Xbox. Bonnie Ross has led Microsoft's Halo brand for 15 years, and we will call this the positive spin article. Industry and Microsoft veteran Bonnie Ross is announcing her retirement today with an intent to focus on family as 343 Industries moves to restructure its leadership roles. This is interesting in terms of messaging because it doesn't actually talk about medical issues, but instead kind of leans into that focusing on being with the family kind of concept, which is a little bit distinct from what the message actually says. Bonnie Ross worked within Microsoft's games business for the best part of 3 decades, working on franchises like Gears of War, Alan Wake, and even third-party publishing deals on titles like Jade Empire and Mass Effect. Most famously, she took the reins at 343 Industries after pitching her version for Halo against a Microsoft corporate climate that felt as though the franchise was in decline, framing her as the rescuer of Halo in some important regards. They then quote the specific tweet that we just read at the top of this video, and importantly it says, Halo Infinite has launched to critical acclaim, but Microsoft is restructuring 343 Industries' leadership to better position the game for the future of its live service. They're restructuring the whole company in light of this. Looking a little bit further, to that end, Microsoft announced the leadership team is undergoing something of a restructure, splitting Bonnie Ross's role into 3 parts to better serve the franchise's growing footprint, which now includes a TV show and other cross-media projects. They got some photos here. Studio veteran and production lead Pierre Heinz will become studio head of 343 effective immediately, leading the studio's ongoing development of Halo Infinite and the Master Chief Collection, as well as future games. The senior leadership team will expand with new roles, including Brian Koski, who will become GM of franchise, and Elizabeth Van Wyk, who will oversee business and operations. Bonnie Ross noted on her Twitter feed that she'd hoped to stay through the winter update, but a family medical issue has brought forward her plans. Now let's take a pause here for just a second, because this is not the move of a company that wasn't expecting this. right? There are emergencies and there are emergencies. We've looked at a lot of corporate messaging here in Virtual Legality, and we've looked at a lot of responses to executives leaving companies' employ, specifically and most kind of egregiously in terms of the responses to this kind of issue at BioWare and Electronic Arts, where if you recall, they had mass shifts in who was doing what at that company, and EA always seemed flat-footed, including having to parachute in executives from the parent company, Electronic Arts, to actually put forward blog posts and announce these things and say, we will fill these roles at some point in the future. That's what it looks like to have a shoe dropped on you. That's what it looks like when there is an emergency or a surprise termination or leaving. Here, what you have is a Microsoft that's ready to go. You have a Microsoft that knows who it wants to lead 343, knows that it wants 343 managed in a slightly different way than was it being managed while Bonnie Ross was there, and is enacting that plan the second that she is announcing her departure, which means that this departure was coordinated with Microsoft and that Microsoft knew it was going to happen. That's the positive spin, right? They had a plan. They're ready to go. Halo Infinite, very critically acclaimed. They're going to get on the right foot. Either way, again, not discounting the family medical issue, because we will not do that in this space. It is clear that Microsoft wants to change at least aspects of how 343 was structured in order to do what they want to do with Halo Infinite, which I don't think anybody would actually disagree has not been the smoothest launch for what they want to do with that product for the last 2 years or so. If you want to look at the more negative approach to looking at this, we've got Polygon, we've got Kotaku. Halo boss Bonnie Ross steps down as head of 343 Industries. She's worked with Halo for 15 years, and the highlights in these particular articles are of a more negative nature. Right? Reached for comment, a Microsoft spokesperson said, after more than 28 years in gaming at Microsoft, including 15 years leading 343 Industries and Halo through its most ambitious steps forward, Bonnie Ross will be leaving Microsoft and spending more time with her family. We are thankful for her leadership of 343, during which the team launched Halo 4, Halo 5, Halo the Master Chief Collection, the Halo television series, and Halo Infinite. We wish her all the best. And it's amazing to me, stepping aside from this entire issue, this list are all launches and products that I would consider to be subpar, or at least subpar for what needs to be your flagship franchise. Master Chief and Halo are supposed to be your Mario. So I've had an issue personally, again, announcing my tilt for the world to see as much as I can, of thinking that 343 had been heading the wrong direction with their franchise forever. And so I understand why people are talking about this story so much, and it's one of the reasons I'm doing this video, but we don't know what we don't know in terms of how this restructuring came about. The 343 team is hard at work shipping the winter update, the biggest Halo Infinite update since launch. And then, like I said, that negative spin, Ross's departure comes after a few tumultuous years for the Halo franchise. The studio's current release, Halo Infinite, was delayed a full year in 2020, missing the launch of the Xbox Series X. When Halo Infinite was released, it was absent expected features like co-op play and Forge mode. 343 Industries expects to ship those features with the game's winter update. Cross your fingers, folks. Due in November, and pledged to provide better live service support for the game's competitive multiplayer component. Earlier this month, 343 Industries shared a roadmap for these upcoming features and others, but delivered the bad news that Halo Infinite's promised split-screen co-op mode had been axed, leaving Halo Infinite and the Master Chief Collection in a very poor kind of launch state for what was promised and what's been delivered, etc., etc. Ross's exit follows another major executive departure this year after Halo Infinite design head Jerry Hoek left the company in May. So it is a year of transition for 343 Industries, and if you feel like I do, I understand feeling positive that any change is good change. Now, that's not always the case, and we will see what happens there. And we wish Bonnie Ross and her family all the best, because health is the most important. But we do see in these articles continued spinning of that negativity, right? That Halo was maybe not in the best shape, that the TV show was maybe not received in the best way possible. We get this in article after article, and we get it in Kotaku and The Verge and Polygon and these various other places. Maybe not the most positive places online. Certainly if you're Microsoft, you want this message to go out from Windows Central more than anything else. But at the end of the day, you do have a sea change in the way that the flagship franchise of Microsoft's Halo looks to be managed, right? You replace one person with three. You have a franchise head as well as a studio head. You separate that out from the business head, and you start to see what they're planning with Halo and looking at framing it a little bit differently. So for this big news today, I wanted to talk to you about it a little bit. What do you think? Do you think that Bonnie Ross leaving 343 Industries signals a sea change? Do you think Halo will be treated differently? Do you like Halo Infinite? What are your thoughts on the future of this brand, this franchise, and the future of Xbox and Microsoft? Because remember, when Microsoft closes that Activision deal, and I still believe that they will, I know people ask me this every day, they will be in charge of a great many intellectual properties in our wonderful industry. And it's up to them to make sure that they're managed properly and that they get good products out to us. So let me know. And again, if you do want to support the channel and conversations like this in the business and law of video games, check out our Utreon and our Patreon. Many thanks to LadyEmily for doing just that again this month. If you don't like any of those options, just subscribe, tell your friends, ring bells, hit buttons on this platform or elsewhere. It all seems to work. Every little bit helps. And if you caught this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. If you listen to it as a podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.